First off, get your shovel. The blizzard's coming. Get your milk, your snow, your toilet paper, all that good stuff. But it is bracketology. It is March Madness. The Terps have, I don't even want to say they limped into this tournament. They almost crawled into the tournament based on what we saw on Friday night. But Luke Jones is here to talk all things Terps. And Luke, I guess the recurring theme I'm going to keep coming back to here this week is whatever that was on Friday night, and it really was an incredible, historic turn of Terps fans showing up in D.C. Friday. It was electrifying down there. It was amazing until the game started, especially the second half. But and you can't sugarcoat how they played, but it didn't cost them, which is the strangest thing. You leave the arena on Friday night down there in D.C., come home thinking, well, they're going to be in the tournament, but maybe they're going to be the 11 seed or the 10 seed or whatever that thing's going to be after limping in. And, brackets come out on Sunday night. It's almost like they won a game or two over the weekend, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, the whole conference tournament thing, and I even said this Friday night, and look, I'm not, you just said it. There's no way to sugarcoat how poorly Maryland played in the second half. Couldn't take care of the ball. They weren't hitting shots. It was brutal. There's no way to dismiss that. But at the same time, and I made this comment in the final minutes of the game on Twitter at WNST, that I'm not hot and bothered about conference tournaments unless you need to win. And clearly when you're talking about mid-majors or you're talking about a team that is on the outside looking in, or you're on the bubble and you're trying to make your resume look a little bit better, then that's a different story. But a team like Maryland that, even with their struggles over the last month, with them getting those final two wins to close out the regular season, you knew that they were a stone-cold lock for the tournament, regardless of the fact that the selection show, they came down to the final two teams being announced. I knew that Maryland was going to be one of those two teams. Now, I wasn't sure what their seed was going to be when you saw Wisconsin got an 8 seed, which was interesting.
And Michigan got a 7, right?
Yeah.
It's...
Well, the Big Ten thing was weird. There's no doubt. But my point is, Maryland... Look, it would have been great to see them have a better showing in D.C. when you're playing in your own backyard, a Big Ten tournament at the Verizon Center for the first time. But at the end of the day, unless you win it, and even then, I'm not sure how much winning your conference tournament, how much value that gives you if you're already a lock. So I think there's something to be said that, yeah, it's disappointing. Yeah, you need to turn the page very quickly. But at the same time, you make the argument, well, they only played one game. They get a couple extra days rest. If they can clear their minds, get their heads right, they get a little bit of practice time in. Clearly, they're going to be trying to get out of Dodge before this blizzard hits over the next couple of days.
And a strange opponent as well, right?
Yeah.
A strange opponent that's hobbled, that's crippled, that's playing a little left-handed right now, right?
Yeah, a team that lost Edmund Sumner, their talented point guard, who was one of their two best players, if not the best player, lost him to a torn ACL at the end of January. They're a team that, as much as we've talked about Maryland's struggles, they had a 6-game losing streak that they took into the final game of the regular season. Now, Xavier had a nice run in the Big East tournament to kind of make their resume look a little bit better if there was any doubt there. But they're clearly a team that's struggling too. But it's also a team that still has some talent, a team that was seeded much higher last year. And that's going to be a challenge. But
dude, they went a month without winning a game. They went the whole month of February without winning. Like, literally, they beat DePaul on February 8th, and we were getting back from the Super Bowl. They didn't win again until March 4th when they played DePaul. So, Villanova, Providence, Marquette, Seton Hall, Butler, they lost for a month. That's kind of incredible when you lose for a month and still make the tournament. They're feeling good about being an 11 seed, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And they're probably... Yeah, they're probably saying, well, if Maryland's a 6, why are we an 11? That's probably a fair question to make. But they beat Butler in the Big East tournament. That's a nice win for them, even though they lost to Creighton then to bow out. But that's certainly an interesting matchup from that regard. But in Maryland's case, I'll go back to this. As far as them being a 6 seed, I think you look at the fact that the Terps did such a good job playing away from College Park early in the season. They had the few neutral site wins, and they stacked road wins in the Big Ten. And I think the selection committee, even though their seeding made it clear that they probably didn't have a good feel for just how good all these teams were in the Big Ten as far as ranking the 7 teams that made it into the tournament. It's clear that there was still enough respect that 7 teams did get in from the Big Ten, but I think with Maryland, you just very plainly look at the fact that they won as many road games as they did, and that has to be, in my mind, the biggest reason why they were able to get a 6 seed when I think most people even best case was kind of looking at them as a 7. Maybe they'd be an 8, and like I said, based on some of that other seeding that we talked about with some of these other Big Ten teams, when I saw Wisconsin was an 8, I was thinking, okay, maybe Maryland ends up being a 9 or a 10 or something along those lines. So interesting to see that, but on the flip side, you look at Maryland, they face Xavier, clearly not going to be an easy first-round game, but second round, Florida State or Dunk City, Florida Gulf Coast, who actually has a pretty decent team. Maybe not sure they were what they were a few years ago when they made that improbable run, but who knows what happens. But Maryland, very clearly, they need to get themselves right. They need to erase the memory of what happened Friday night against Northwestern and just turn the page. And hey, it's a new season. You can talk all you want about struggles in the Big Ten down the stretch, but now you're going to be playing teams that aren't as familiar with you. You're not as familiar with them. And with the Terps, they got to get back to playing better team defense. And it's very clear they need to make shots. They need to hit from the outside. They are a team that's going to dribble, drive, try to get to the basket, and kick it out. They don't have that size in the paint. They don't have that depth in the paint where it's really just going to be dependent on matchups, and Maryland's just going to have to hit their shots. It's that simple.
Well, DeMonte Dodd has size. It's just them what to do with it. And we saw them struggle so many different ways, I think, on Friday night. Yeah. And really over the last month, when they struggled, it sort of has felt like sort of fallen and can't get up. And it feels like the confidence goes away. Certainly the rebounding's never going to come. They're just not going to be able to play a big game. They're going to have to hit shots. But more than that, taking care of the basketball was something that when they were winning and when they were staying in games, and certainly on those road games, Melo was carrying the ball like my dad would say, like a loaf of bread on Friday night. And it kind of caught up to them, especially when the shots weren't falling in the second half and they couldn't get a rebound.
Well, what was it? Maryland point guards, Melo and Anthony Cowan, I think they combined for 11 turnovers. I don't have the exact box score in front of me.
I think that's correct.
But it was bad. I mean, your point guards have to handle the rock better than that. I mean, you don't have to be John Wooden to understand that. So I think this team, because they are so young, they are a team that I think their confidence is a little more fragile than a typical team, a team that's a little more tested, and that's understandable. But they need to get Justin Jackson back on track a little bit. You hope maybe having close to a week off does him some good.
Dude, the air ball was
two of them.
And then you never heard from him again, really, right?
Yeah, I mean, you need to get him going. Cowan, Friday notwithstanding, Cowan's played better down the stretch. Kevin Huerter was brilliant on Friday night. He was the best player for Maryland on the floor. So, you need to get at least a couple of those guys going if Maryland's going to make any kind of a run. We know they're going to live and die ultimately with Melo Trimble, and that's fine. Melo's the heart and soul of that team, but he can't do it all by himself. I mean, we saw, I think, on a few different occasions over this last month that, even at Wisconsin, where Trimble was so brilliant for the first 30 minutes or so of that game, he had no help, and you saw what happened then. Maryland got their butts kicked in the final 12 minutes of that game. So, if they're going to make any kind of a meaningful run, if they're going to win a couple games here, get back to the Sweet 16, which I think anyone would absolutely sign off on that. I mean, when you consider this team lost 4 or 5 starters from last year, they started 3 freshmen. Deion Wiley was a non-factor this year. Michael Tchaikovsky was essentially a non-factor because of injuries. For this team to be where they are right now, and that's not to blow past the fact that they've struggled over the last 5 weeks. Everyone understands that. But
none of that's going to matter Thursday night. I mean, literally, they're either going to march ahead or they're going to – this will be a lost kind of season, I think, if they go out in the 60. If they lose to Xavier on Thursday night and go quietly and do something like get outscored 20-2 like they did on Friday or whatever, this won't be remembered as a stellar Maryland year despite a 20-2 start. As a matter of fact, it's going to be one of those – NFL seasons where you start 9-1 and make the playoffs and get your butts kicked in the first. I mean, it's kind of feels that way because 20-2 was not representative of what they probably were, but they were 20-2. And when that happens, not winning on Thursday, not surviving the weekend, really, puts a bad taste in your mouth, I think, for the offseason. I think we all expected there to be some excitement. I think Friday night represented a lot of the excitement of cooped-up Maryland fans cheering Scott Van Pelt and getting crazy until such point where it's like, well, what happened? We just lost. I think this week, these matchups, the Florida State thing, the ACC thing, there is opportunity here, Luke. We can all see that they are good enough to win, even if it's just surviving on Thursday night. They can win this game, and then obviously the Florida State thing is a lot different than taking on one of the real powers, which they may have seen in a 2 seed or a 1 seed had they been a 7 or an 8 or a 9, but they're not.
Yeah, and again, I think the expectations for this season, it's strange how you look at it, because you look at the beginning of the year, if someone had told you Maryland would be a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, I think everyone would have done cartwheels. But the fact that they did start the way they did with a 20-2 record, and as you pointed out, I don't think anyone who was watching this team game in and game out really felt that they were a 20-2 team where you're talking about them being a potential top 10 team, and they were up into the high teens at one point in the top 25 rankings. I think everyone figured there'd be a market correction, but there's been quite a bit of that, and I think
as there has been for Xavier, who was 18-6 at one point, right?
Sure. If Maryland can at least get to the round of 32, and look, I'm not saying that means it's grounds for having a parade in College Park if they do that. But I think, realistically speaking, given the fact that we know what flaws this team has, how young they are, how they lost Tchaikovsky, so that there went their depth inside the paint behind Dodd. They get to the round of 32. I think you just say, okay, the future's still bright, regardless of what happens with Melo Trimble. You got 3 freshmen coming back. You got more good recruits in the pipeline here over the next couple of years. The future is bright. If they lose to Xavier, then I think calling the whole season a failure would be strong, considering where they started and what the expectations were. But it leaves you wanting. It leaves you thinking, man, for as good as they were over the first 3 months, what really happened here over the final 5 weeks? And in that way, it would kind of feel a little bit like how last year finished, even though the Terps got to the Sweet 16, but we know what kind of ceiling, what kind of expectations were there. Now, those expectations in retrospect, considering how all these hired guns that they essentially brought in just didn't mesh the way they did, maybe the Sweet 16, maybe that was their ceiling or close to it. But with Maryland being where they were 2 months ago, I think at that point, a first-round exit in the NCAA tournament, at that point, everyone would have said, "Oh, that's definitely a disappointment." So, at least get to the round of 32. If you're facing off against Florida State, which they most likely will, barring an upset from Florida Gulf Coast, then you roll the dice and you see what happens. And if Maryland wins that one and you get to the Sweet 16, then after that, everything is absolutely gravy in my mind. But I think there is a little bit of a sense of urgency. Maybe not from the team, even as much as the fan base, just knowing that there's probably a good chance that this is going to be it for Melo Trimble. So not to say the future isn't bright, but just given what he has meant to Mark Turgeon, how he kind of symbolized the turnaround of the Turgeon era, where they missed the NCAA tournament his first 3 years. I think there's probably a sense of want to have put together a nice little respectable run here, at least win one. Get to the Sweet 16 if you can, and then after that, whatever happens, happens. But with Melo and what he's meant to this program over the last 3 years, you don't want to see him be a one-and-done guy. I feel that way about him more so than any statement about the current Terps program.
Well, Luke, I would say this. When the team was 20-2, right, we knew there would be this thing called the tournament, and that, at 20-2, you looked and said, well, they're going to make the tournament, right? And you'd say, well, they're going to play Thursday or Friday. They're going to play on St. Patrick's Day weekend. That when that happens, they're going to go to Orlando. They're going to play Xavier and Florida State. That's the tournament, right? It's a 3-team invitational in your mind. You got to play Xavier, you beat them, you get Florida State, you survive. Good. I think we would have looked at that and said, that's fair. I'll take that deal. I'll take this deal. So, look, I can look through the brackets, right, and say, well, if I were Michigan State, what would my, pathway be in this tournament? If I were Michigan, what would my pathway be? If I were Purdue and I had to take on Vermont and Iowa State, I would say, well, these are the 2 games you're going to see this weekend. I'm okay with it. I mean, it's always nice when you're a 2 seed and you play a 15 or, you draw Jacksonville State or Troy or one of these play-in teams. But that's never who Maryland really was. We never believed that. We believed they would see a mid-major and probably a big conference team of some magnitude. And I'm looking at it and saying, hey, you avoided Duke, you avoided Louisville, you avoided Kansas, you avoided Kentucky. You weren't a 7 or an 8 or a 9, to put yourself in that position. This looks like a doable weekend in Orlando. It's doable. And for that, we're all going to be watching. Now, what they do, we'll judge that on Friday, right?
Yeah. It just comes down to what Maryland team are we going to see? Are we going to see a team that, when they... and look, there haven't been a ton of instances this year where they've played a full 40 minutes. Even early in the year, when they were 20-2, what were we talking about constantly? They would generally not play very well in the first half, and they would get things together and win in the second half. That was even their non-conference schedule against some of the some teams that you wouldn't really expect them to have their issues against. They did. They weren't blowing out a ton of teams early in the season. So, what team are we going to get? This is a team that at times has played good team defense. At times maybe they've never really been a great rebounding team, but maybe haven't been completely dominated.
They don't shoot a lot of free throws, that's for sure, right? That would be something, if you could get Melo to the line somehow a little bit this weekend, that helps things for me.
Well, yeah, you need to, but part of their issue, they've had some times here over these last few weeks where they haven't made their free throws. They were a team that earlier in the year they were making their free throws, and even Melo. We've even seen him over the last few weeks not be as dominant from the line as he normally is. So, it just comes down to I think we've seen enough good from Maryland this year, and we've seen enough not so good, including when they played in their in their own building this year at times, that I don't think anything would surprise us. I wouldn't be shocked if Maryland loses by 10 or 15 points to Xavier. I'm not saying I'm predicting that, but if they don't, if they're not firing on all cylinders and they come out and their confidence level is still reminiscent of what we saw a couple weeks ago or what we saw Friday night at the Verizon Center, then Xavier is a team that's capable of taking it to them. But at the same time, if Maryland's playing at a high level and a couple of the freshmen are feeling it, and Melo Trimble is as good as Melo Trimble can be, then I could see Maryland winning by 10 points. It's just this team, when you've had the kind of struggles that they've had really throughout the whole month of February into the first week of March before they were able to rebound a little bit there at the end of the regular season, it just kind of becomes, hey, even some of these mid-major teams that, Maryland's not going up against at mid-major, but, there are a few, unless you're one of those top line teams, 1, 2, 3 seed, most of the 4 seeds probably, you're playing these are all good teams, it's even some of these last
But a pathway that would have been Wichita State, Kentucky, right? VCU, Arizona. They were, or Marquette and Duke. If that's what you had to see this weekend, and that's literally the difference between them being a 6 seed or 7 seed, then there's, hey, go play in Spokane or Bemidji or, halfway across the country. Orlando's very doable and very happy, I think, for the fans. And if they get bounced on Thursday, go see the Orioles play. I'm just saying, all the way around, this, it's not a dreamy scenario, but what is? The only dream scenario is a bye, and you're not getting that.
Right. If you're a number
you
one
go play,
seed, you're a number 1 seed, Villanova, for example, good luck to Mount St. Mary against New Orleans in the first 4. If they win that one, they play Villanova. So
Well, Wisconsin's going to see them. Their prize for beating Virginia Tech this week. Wisconsin, they were pretty good this year, at 8 seed. They're going to see Villanova before the weekend. They got to survive Villanova this weekend.
Or how about Villanova has to survive Wisconsin?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's just Wichita State being a 10 seed. And look, I'm not going to pretend that I saw Wichita State a whole lot this year. I think I saw them once, but everyone is talking about, and you see their record. I mean, they're a 10 seed. I mean, how would you like to be Dayton, or how would you like to be Kentucky facing the prospects of having to face Wichita State in the second round? I mean, it goes both ways, and I think, just on a more global conversation level, talking about the NCAA tournament, I think most people would look at the field, the 68 teams that were selected, talking the at-larges, the 36 at-large. I think most people are okay with that. I mean, people are talking about Syracuse. Look, you know me, I went to Syracuse. I have nothing but good feelings.
Boeheim's a criminal. That's the truth. Come on, you know it. Admit it.
But at the same time, I mean, you look at their record. You look at the fact that they won 2 games away from the Carrier Dome this year. I get it that they had signature wins, but they had no meat to go along with that. So I think, again, I think the teams that were in the field, I think the committee did a good job with. But some of the seeding, I mean, I just don't get it. I mean, Wisconsin an 8 seed. I mean, if you had asked me before the bracket came out, who's a higher seed, Maryland or Wisconsin? I'm telling you Wisconsin. I mean, I'm not saying it's dramatically, that they're a way higher seed, but I'd say that I'd have them as a higher seed. So it's just so much of this comes down to the matchup, how healthy you are. I mean, like we said, Xavier, lost their point guard in late January. I mean, it's, if they had Edmund Sumner, first of all, they probably wouldn't have lost 7 of their last 10, and they'd probably be a higher seed, and they'd have a much better chance of making a run. But, at the same time, not that he's a star, I think it's been clear, anyone who's watched Maryland since Michael Tchaikovsky went down with the broken ankle, they've just had their issues that much more inside with rebounding and just having another, someone else back to the basket who can score. So it's, there's no way to make a perfect bracket. And as you said, there's no perfect path. I mean, if you're a number 1 seed, you're sitting pretty most of the time. But we even just threw out a couple examples a couple minutes ago about some of these number 1 seeds or number 2 seeds that might have a really difficult draw in the second round. And it's just in the case of Maryland, given where they were a couple weeks ago, being a 6 seed, facing a Xavier team that has some talent but has some flaws and has struggled worse than they did down the stretch, I think you feel pretty darn good about where you are from a bracket, from a seeding, from a position standpoint if you're Maryland. Ultimately, they got to come out and play better basketball than we've seen for the better part of the last 5 weeks.
Well stated. He is Luke Jones. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Baltimore. Luke, you can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. Together, we are getting it done on the WNST tech service. Big tip of the cap to Luke for rocking that thing throughout Ravens free agency. It's still on. It's still live, local, and late breaking. It's still brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. Jump on that. You will always get the news first. Our morning newspaper also ships each and every morning at 7 a.m. to your email inbox. That's free of charge and powered up by Planet Fitness, where it's only $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. I know it's hard to think bikinis with the blizzard warnings coming and the mess that we've created here this week. But Planet Fitness will be there for you. Good weather, bad weather, getting you in shape and keeping you healthy. PlanetFitness.com for all of the information. Anything you miss, you can find in the Buy a Toyota audio vault here 24 hours a day. During the snowstorm, before, during, after, all week long. March Madness. We got WBC. We got the Caps, the Wizards. Certainly everybody watching the Terps on Thursday at 6:50 as they will take on the Xavier Musketeers. How many people are going to call him Xavier this week? It's fun. By the way, Beto Ransom was a former assistant at Xavier, and I'm looking forward to catching up with him a little later on in the week as well. Baseball, football, basketball, free agency, hockey, got golf going on, probably cross-country skiing somewhere down Charles Street before the week's over. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.